Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Deborah Crone. I am a professor of early modern cultural history, and I'm the chair of academic programs at Bard Graduate Center. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Kathryn Killackey. So, welcome. Here at Bard Graduate Center, we study the human past and cultural history through their material traces and the complex ways in which decorative arts, design, history, and material culture mediate our own relationships with the past and the present. Our graduate students, faculty, and research fellows do this work cognizant of our own location and time and space. We're situated in 3 landmark buildings on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenni Lenape people. We're 1 block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park. We're in a neighborhood and in a city long comprised of global migrants and refugees from war, from violence, from economic dislocation. This evening, we are privileged to meet and to learn about the work of Kathryn Killackey, who's a freelance artist and illustrator of science. She has a BA in anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley, an MA in field and analytical techniques in archaeology. I didn't know there was such a specialized degree from the University College London, and a certificate in science illustration from California State University, Monterey Bay. She specializes in archaeological illustration and creating engaging scenes of past peoples. She was illustration team leader from 2007 to 2020. That's a long time. For the Çatalhöyük Research Project, which is a Neolithic site in Anatolia, and was recently awarded an NEH Mellon Foundation Fellowship in Digital Publishing for a visualization project on the late formative occupations at Tiwanaku, Bolivia. And I just want to mention that she was also the lead illustrator for this book, Image Encounters, Moche Murals, and Archeo Art History by Lisa Trevor. This book is the winner of the BGC Horowitz Prize for this year. And so one of the reasons she's here is because of her work for this book, which I'm not going to put it on the table with everything else, but I'll leave it up here, and maybe afterwards, if people are interested, they can come and see it. So once again, let me welcome Kathryn and thank you for coming. And we'll learn lots more about your work, I think, in the course of the talk. So thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and make sure this is pointing at me. Thank you to Bard Graduate Center for inviting me to speak. As you heard, I had a little bit of a winding approach to archaeological illustration. I started out as an actual archaeologist before I got here. But this evening, I'm going to talk to you about archaeological illustration and hopefully convince you that it is a vital tool for archaeological research and sharing interpretations, both with other archaeologists and various publics. A quick point before I start is that I have included illustrations of human remains in burial contexts. There are no photographs in this talk, and I understand if this is something you don't want to see, and you can feel free to slip out. The first one of these illustrations is in my 17th slide, I think. All right. So I first want to start more broadly with what archaeologists do. We build narratives about past cultures from a fragmented material culture, piles of ceramic sherds, lost buttons, flaked stone debitage, all things left behind, either accidentally or with intention, by people in the past. And we also look carefully at the context these things were found in: middens or trash piles, remains of houses, elaborately prepared burials. But this collection of objects and contexts used to reconstruct past culture is always incomplete. because some materials decay faster than others. Some objects are broken in use or their use is unknown, and some have been removed from their original context. And some cultural practices leave no material trace at all. So how do archaeologists move from something like this, these rocky outcrops, to this? From fragments to whole objects, peoples, and cultures. A few years ago, I created this portrait of a Neanderthal woman for the Stelita Naxos Archaeological Project, directed by Dr. Tristan Carter of McMaster University. The site, Stelita, is located on the island of Naxos, one of the many Greek islands in the Aegean Sea. It is an outcrop of chert, a kind of sedimentary rock full of silica that, like obsidian, has been frequently used by humans for stone tools. Archaeologists have examined the tools and remains of tool making found at the site and determined it was used for a chert quarry and stone tool workshop over a long period, from about 13 to 2,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago, I'm sorry. Some of the stone tool technology found there is Acheulean and Mousterian, so from the middle Paleolithic and associated with Neanderthals in Europe. So on the one hand, you have evidence of Neanderthals and other humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, at the site, but the only material found is stone. There's no other kinds of archaeological materials found at this site. So in order to create my illustration, I ended up having to go and look much more broadly and draw on data recovered from other Neanderthal archaeological sites in Greece and the surrounding countries. Besides skeleton material found at these other sites, there's also evidence back here. There's also evidence for feather use. These are griffin vulture feathers here, which that was found at a site in Gibraltar. Shell beads that were perforated and used as ornaments, possibly, which were found in Spain. And evidence for textile production like cordage and braiding, which has been found in France. So this portrait is perhaps an extreme example of drawing disparate data together to create a narrative out of fragmented material culture. And it's only one possibility of what the past there was like. But it was created for a public exhibit in the local Stelita community. And I think probably it is more evocative than a pile of chert flakes like this. This here is an early attempt at visualizing a Neanderthal from 1909, drawn by Franstick Kupa under the direction of Marcelin Boulet. And you can note the difference between this and my portrait, and that reflects our growing body of data on Neanderthals and pre-sapien hominids. I've recently seen people speculating about the potential to find a Neanderthal in the permafrost, and I'm very interested. I mean, that would be the most amazing find, and I wonder how that would totally blow all these reconstructions out of the water. But archaeologists have used illustrations like this one since the beginning of the field as a way to record their findings and share them with others. Archaeologists, which are like the magpies of the social scientists and humanities, apply a broad range of theories and methods from many different fields. A little bit of geology here, a little bit of 3D scanning there, and illustrations can synthesize all these disparate forms of data sets, as well as being deployed as an analytical tool in its own right. And today, even with recent advances in digital recording technologies, illustration is still used in every stage of the archaeological process, from excavation to publication. One of the first part of the process in the field during excavation, there's illustration is used to record various features, and every archaeologist draws, even if they say they don't, and they don't consider themselves illustrators or artists. While excavating, they draw maps of everything they are recovering. They draw the layers of accumulated soil, the stratigraphy, as it's seen in a vertical slice through the site. They make sketches of artifacts and the structures they uncover. This is a photo of me at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, the Neolithic site I worked at for a while, and recording a wall painting as my voice goes away. I am not drawing directly on the wall. There's a layer of mylar in between my pen and the wall, and I'm tracing the pattern. And then here is another wall painting from the site, which I recorded in its entirety and digitized in Adobe Illustrator at the bottom there. I also make scaled technical drawings of artifacts found on archaeological sites, showing them. There's a series of conventions for artifact illustration that vary from different continents, but they show standard views of artifacts and things like their profile and sections through the artifact. I also make reconstructions, scenes of landscapes. This is my favorite part of archaeological illustration, and what I have come to focus on more than artifact illustration. This is a flooded landscape in Bolivia, in the Llanos de Mojos region in the lowlands. So it's inundated with water annually, and there's all these little islands that look like little forests that the archaeologists are now coming to understand are human made, and they became, in the wet season, would become islands that in transportation would switch to canoes. I also, I do not create all types of archaeological illustration, but many people work in archaeological comics, computer games, virtual reality, 3D modeling. On the right here is some work by my friend and colleague Colleen Morgan, who built the entirety of Çatalhöyük in Second Life, if people remember that kind of virtual online space that was around in the early 2000s. And John Swogger, who was the illustrator at Çatalhöyük before me, and has created this comic about a site in Bolivia that I have also excavated at, called Chiripa. So the spectrum of archaeological visualizations can be found in a range of places, such as academic reports, journals and books, nonfiction trade books, children's literature, textbooks, museum displays and signage, posters. These are some examples of some public posters and a sign. The one on the right is being installed at a national park in California, or a state park rather, Trussell's. And just as an aside, since I mentioned children's books, did you know that Beatrix Potter, the creator of Peter Rabbit, also did archaeological illustration? Not very much, but she did do some of that and some botanical illustration, in which I think you can see her attention to detail of nature and material culture when you look at her children's illustrations. It's just, I like that little fact. The speculative and subjective nature of illustration is sometimes seen as a drawback. Why illustrate is a question I'm frequently asked. And there's this belief that digital media, such as or also pre-digital film, but photographs And 3D models are superior conveyors of archaeological data. And that's often the subtext to the question, like, why are you drawing this? I've even had people question my right to be part of the archaeological discussion because what I'm creating is considered art and not science. But I would say that all illustration is interpretation, whether it is intended for an academic or more general audience. I see the subjectivity in it as actually a strength and an integral part of what I do. Even with artifact illustrations, seemingly straightforward representations of objects, my clients and I make decisions about the object's manufacture or purpose and encode them in the drawing. These decisions are made on a larger scale with reconstructions, depicting interpretations of past architectural use, behaviors, and landscapes. And this decision-making process is an ongoing dialogue between the illustrator and the archaeologists with interpretive consequences. So to answer why illustrate, illustration allows you to encode information about an artifact in a single image. Some examples here that I have at the top is a figurine from Knossos prior to the well-known Minoan occupation. This is Neolithic. And I've put in where it had paint and where the paint possibly was before it was eroded. Worked bone, the convention is unworked areas that are the natural surface of the bone are stippled, whereas areas that have been worked and polished are drawn with parallel hashing, parallel lines. So when you look at an illustration, you can know immediately what parts of a bone have been worked. With the ceramics, you can show different information. For example, how handles were formed. If you see the upper left piece of pottery, I have a pointer here, and this is a profile section of the sherd. The profile is filled in black, but the part through the handle is left white in the interior, and that indicates that was an additive process, that the maker formed the vessel and then took more clay and attached it to the original wall instead of pulling it out of the body of the vessel. The process of drawing also facilitates a better understanding of the object. As Dr. Sarah Perry, a visual anthropologist, has written, it is in these acts of creation that novel research questions may be born. It is perhaps the process of making graphic representation that is of import for archaeologists above the actual representation or the representative output itself. And I think this is one of the major overlooked powers of archaeological illustration. It is often used at the end of a research project to accompany a publication, but it has great potential during the earlier phases of research as well. For example, a few years ago at Châteauhoux, Dr. Sophie Moore, who's now at Newcastle University, asked me to draw several Byzantine intaglio rings that had been excavated from the late burials there. And one ring had been looked at briefly by a previous specialist, and the intaglio had been recorded as depicting a scorpion. But Sophie, on closer examination, found the intaglio, in fact, depicted a standing figure with hands held out to either side. And she identified this figure as Artemis of Ephesus, the Greek goddess. Now, she asked me to draw it, and while I was drawing it, this is the in-progress pencil version of the drawing, I noticed that there were some marks, etched marks below the hands here and here. And I drew them in, but I wasn't sure whether those were intentional or perhaps something that happened post-depositionally. They had been scratched. And I went back to Sophie, and she didn't have the answer to the question either. But she did some research and discovered that Artemis is often depicted twining wool, and that this was what I was seeing. So my intense looking during the drawing process had uncovered previously unrecorded details of this artifact and also helped her confirm her initial identification of the figure. And here I have the final illustration on the right. I'm sorry, your left, which is a segment of wall painting from Panamarca, Peru, that I recorded for Dr. Lisa Trevor of Columbia University. And on the right, you can see various iterations of her and myself and Jessica Ortiz, the project's director, annotating and asking questions and checking details. And you can see this is a conversation between the three of us that helped us clarify the imagery. Illustration also lets you see things that no longer exist and in ways that are not possible with cameras. For example, you can take cross sections through things like ritual deposits and burials. You can reconstruct fragmented pottery down here. And you can show multiple interpretations, multiple possibilities of how the material culture was used in the past. You can also show multiple interpretations or hypotheses. This is showing the chain operatoire, the steps in processing tubers at an early Natufian site in Jordan. And so it's synchronic. It shows time passing, and it also shows the levels of interpretive certainty, where my client felt that this step was more likely than these other options that are coming off the side, but she still thought it was important to show that she explored other avenues, so they're all included in a single illustration. And then one of the also again, multiple views or ways of showing material where this is a burial from Çatalhöyük where I've reconstructed a very disturbed burial. I'm showing where the skeletal remains would have looked like. I've also then refleshed it. And then this is the skull that was cradled in this woman's arms that was also painted with red plaster and conserved by the people of Çatalhöyük. But it was very crushed and disturbed by animal activity. And so I also was able to envision what it might have looked like 9,000 years ago. But also, I just want to point out is interpretations have changed since I made this illustration in 2010-ish. And they have some more evidence about the ways burials or bodies were treated before burial. And really, this illustration should be updated and to meet new interpretations. One of the other most important things is peopling the past, getting to put the people in and showing them in all their individuality. This is an illustration of children getting into trouble on the rooftop of houses at Çatalhöyük. Dr. Ruth Tringham, professor just retired recently from Berkeley, has written about archaeologists have a tendency to populate their sites with faceless blobs. And illustration is a way for us to remember that there were actually people behind these artifacts that lived rich lives in the past. And some other examples of the ability to juxtapose different types of representation to show, what we have, these fragments of wood versus what we think it was part of as a whole. The illustrator is a guide in the archaeological illustrations, leading you through the archaeological data and arranging it in specific ways to highlight different interpretations or data sets. So not only do I present these archaeologists' ideas, I also help guide the viewer's eye to key information by making compositional and rendering decisions like this juxtaposition or like the amount of detail I put in. This is a basketry crown found in Panamarca from Lisa Trevor's project. And they had this small fragment here, and they wanted an illustration of what it might have looked like as a complete object. And so we made the decision to not fully render the imagined portion, so you still have a sense of what was there and then what might have been. And I can present the same information to different audiences. This is one building from Çatalhöyük, and I can show it as a plan view. I can show it as an isometric reconstruction with a cutaway wall. I can show a scene inside that building. This is people in the small storage room off the side of the main room. And I can also be more general and show just the basic layout of a building at Çatalhöyük. And these 4 images are all all hold different types of data, and they're suitable for different kinds of audiences. I think that is why we illustrate, and there are all these exciting types of new technologies that are being adopted all over the place in archaeological projects, with drones conducting landscape survey, digital recording on site, 3D modeling of artifacts and architecture. And while I don't usually produce that kind of imagery myself, I do find them very useful and complementary to what I do. For example, I've just started working at a site in Mexico, and I visited it last summer. It's a Maya site called La Cuna Tzetzal, and it's the south of Mexico, in Chiapas. And so I visited the site last summer and sketched and took notes. And this is on site, and it's the view that I will be reconstructing. What do you think is actually in these 2 photographs I've put together? We have a pyramid, a ball court, and a necropolis. It's a very large architecture that is completely hidden by the modern vegetation. And so I'm working with their LiDAR data, which this is the site. This is a digital elevation model. The different shades of green are tied to different elevations. They have roughly mapped buildings, but not with a lot of detail. And then I've extracted topographic lines in QGIS to help me figure out roughly how tall things are. So keep in mind that this is also including like tree heights. And then I'm trying to then turn those into eventually a full reconstruction. Right now I'm just working through the details of different buildings. This is the necropolis, seeing on the lower down in a plan view and above at the side elevation. Eventually I will start trying to translate that into 3-dimensional space. But the foundation of those digital technologies is a great help to me. I don't have to measure anything. So sometimes I go old school though, and I make maquettes myself. So this is an example of a figurine from Jordan that in the Natufian period that was made out of part of a sheep's foot, and I think was a figurine. So I built it out of clay and various sticks and things I had around to help me really get a sense for the texture of the object. And these are some other maquettes that I've made, some of them which are up here. I actually did not make this one. It is a 3D printed from a I think it was actually laser scanned and made into a model and then 3D printed to scale. So I actually made this drawing from the original artifact, but now have this on loan and I would like to make a reconstruction of someone making it. And then this is the largest maquette I have attempted so far. It's a Medu village in around 1850 in California. So I am making this reconstruction for a group of scientists in California they're looking at the historic life cycles of Chinook salmon by partly in collaboration with the Estome Umeka Medu tribe, and to understand past ways of managing these resources. And they're looking at the otolith, which is a small bone in salmon's ears, which can tell you about salmon's diet and their travels during their life cycle. But this is showing, this maquette is turning into, after a whole bunch of research for reference from various historical photos and from the archaeology. There was initial sketching. This is the first, before I had done much research of the houses are wrong. Lots of things are wrong, but starts to get more specific after conversations with lots of questions and feedback. I built the maquette. I have a my final preliminary drawing with most of the details planned out, and questions and feedback with the team. And then this is where I'm at now. It is almost finished. It always seems the closer you get to the end of a painting, the more you have to do. And I could spend weeks just, thinking about how the grass is folding down under a basket, or how the fabric bends as someone bends their knees. There's never enough time, and I can never put enough stuff into my reconstructions. The details of past material culture, even in fragments, are endless. So I hope this whirlwind tour of my process is giving you a sense of the work behind archaeological images, and you can see that they're not just decorative flourishes for text. And then I'd like to finish by referring to Ursula K. Le Guin's short essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. If you're not familiar with her writing, she was an American science fiction author, and she was also the daughter of Alfred Kroeber, a cultural anthropologist who was the first professor at UC Berkeley in their anthropology department. So that, I think that her familial life really informs her science fiction and her approach to the cultures that she writes. And in this essay, she writes about alternative narratives and the smaller, overlooked stories of every day versus the dominant grand action narratives of hunting, killing, and fighting. She talks about how maybe the story of human culture is the story of a container, the impulse to save something for later, to put it into a container, whether some food, something useful, something beautiful. And her container's contents become intangible throughout the essay until she's talking about books and painting as containers that hold ideas and stories. And that small impulse and forward thinking that drives many daily activities and interactions is the core of the kinds of stories that she wanted to tell. And this has always been my interest in archaeology, the small moments and little details of past lives. And this is a small moment. It is a scene of an older woman painting a younger woman's back in Paleolithic Europe, maybe 40,000 years ago. And I'm interested in thinking about how a hand cupped a carved wooden bowl, or how a coiled basketry hat might have sat on a woman's head. How the carved bone beads sound clinking against each other on a wrist, and how the bast fiber fabric would have felt in someone's hand. And illustration can help us think about these things and share them with others. And because the companion or flip side to Something Left Behind, this talk's title, is Something for Later, which when I'm feeling fanciful and inspired by Le Guin, I come to think of my illustrations as containers, fashioned to hold rich visions of the past, made up of data, multiple narratives, and possibilities. storing those somethings for later and for the future. Oh, I've gone all the way back. Sorry. There you go. So thank you for listening, and to the Bard Graduate Center.
Thank you. We have time for questions now. If you have a question, just raise your hand.
Hi, that was wonderful. I am also an artist approaching archaeology, and so it's very wonderful to hear how you approach. I was wondering if you see, I know you don't work with digital aspects, but if you see any encroachment of AI and sort of those generative images on archaeological illustration.
Well, it definitely makes looking for reference material a lot more difficult. You know, if you just do Google image search, you have to be really careful that you haven't found a Frankenstein monster of a Chinook salmon or something. But also, there was an article published in, I think, December 2023, and I'm not coming up with the author's name right now, but it was trying to show how digital AI generated images were useful for archaeologists and archaeological publishing. And then they had an example of creating a scene of Neanderthals around a fire in a cave. And I strongly disagreed with the content of the article. I think, as I hopefully have demonstrated, that a large part of the benefit of archaeological illustration is the thought process behind it. And that doesn't happen with AI generated images. I mean, you can tweak them and ask for slight variations, but it's not, doesn't build on it, right? It just kind of goes off and tries again, and it kind of, so I think you lose that with AI, and it does become more decorative, more homogenized and generic. And then another critique of archaeological illustration has been the reflection of unconscious biases in image making. For example, you know, a lot of early images of hunter-gatherers would have women only doing family-based tasks, tending to children in the background of an image, and men would be in the foreground. And archaeology and visual anthropology has addressed that and tried to address that. And I think there has been changes since the 80s when these kind of topics were being talked about. And so if you're creating an AI image that is drawing on a very large data set of the history of human image making, then I think you're going, maybe, I haven't tested this, but I suspect you would go backwards and start seeing these older biases thrown back up into the images.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, love the talk. I thought it was so interesting. I was thinking about the objects and the sites, and as an archaeologist, a lot of times when we talk about sites, a lot of my professors are like, "Oh, you just have to go there. Like, you have to see it in person." And I was really wondering how being at like Château and really holding these pieces, and maybe being in Mexico, how that is like important to your work, and how maybe it has like changed, maybe like thinking about the development of the pictures, and you showed us the different stages, like how has that changed after either holding the pieces or actually visiting the sites that you work at?
Right. That's my preference, is to be able to go to a site if I'm doing reconstruction illustrations. Not obviously not always possible financially or time wise, but I think being at a site in person and having the the experience of the three-dimensional experience of being at the site and having a sense of the texture and seeing it in different times of day, taking your own reference photographs, not what an archaeologist took, not thinking about what they would be used for, or something I can find on the web. Though Google Earth, Google Google Maps are sometimes very helpful. People put a lot of their own personal photos up there, and you can see a lot of places that you maybe wouldn't think you could. But yeah, I think that is the ideal, is being able to see the site in person. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, thanks for that. It was wonderful. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your experience of the limitations of illustration and where you find you bump up against them and what solutions you find.
Sure. Well, I think one limitation is probably time and financial, in the sense that people want, when they come to commission illustrations, they want a illustration and one that does everything, which has become much easier with not easier on my end, but kind of easier to do with journals, academic journals publishing online, and so color images are um, much more affordable, as well as the ability to zoom in on images online, so you can forever click in and see, like that. I mean, my salmon scene is bordering on that. It has taken much more effort than I initially had planned on it taking, because you can zoom in and it shows the whole village, and it shows people, there's certain activities that they wanted depicted, and it's showing all of them in one image. And so I've found, or I'm becoming increasingly more interested in creating multiple images of a single topic, that come together to create, not a whole, but all these pieces overlap and collage and create, I think, a more interesting picture of the past, and something that where you can have those fine details and individual moments, but also hopefully address the larger concerns of the researchers. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So I have a question. I was really struck by the image of the woman holding the other figure, and I wonder, like, to the extent that reconstruction is storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
to what extent do you in your mind think about the stories that are behind, especially the humans that you reconstruct? I mean, there are narratives, like the woman, the grooming, or what, the last image that you showed. There's obviously some really big story behind that, and in your, are those stories that are, I mean, obviously they're not written, but where do they come from?
Yeah, it's something that I with the archaeologists, the people I'm working with, kind of through our conversations come about, and so they are informed by the archaeology and by the data, but they're also a possibility, or one vision of how those pieces could come together. So, I mean, that's another limitation of illustration, and a critique of illustration, is that you create an image and then interpretation moves on, or it only shows one version of what could be possible. And archaeologists can be very reticent to make images. They're happy to write a paragraph about their theory, but making it visual is somehow a step too far. And so, and images can be removed from their original textual content and be given, they're out of your control after they go out into the world, and people can read all sorts of things into them, which is, I think, is a concern. But I think that is true of text. Text can be misquoted, misused, but there's something special about imagery that makes it harder for people to commit to. And I guess my answer is there should be more images. Just flood the zone, and then all the possibilities, and then that would be less of a concern, I guess. Yeah.
We have a question up here.
Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit more about your process in doing other kinds of like visual or artistic reproduction, like talking about like weaving, or and if do those just inform your final illustration, or are you using reproduction in kind of a scientific or like data driven way, if that makes sense?
So I wouldn't consider it experimental archaeology per se. I'm not controlling conditions. I'm using artificial sinew and sticks from my backyard, but I'm using it in a way to make sure that I have I understand the details in the illustration, in the form and the shape, and that I can get, you know, the light and the volume of the object correct. And I don't know. I can't at the moment point to any specific examples, but I do feel like it helps me understand the object and makes the illustrations better that way. Sometimes I find I put too much detail in and have to then take things out. But I think just the knowing of the physicality as a basis makes it a better illustration. Yeah.
Any other questions? Then please join me in thanking Kathryn Killackey.